Our first foray into toolpathing will only require 2-axis machining operations. Now, they're called 2-axis because we're only basing this on 2D geometry. Of course, the tool does move in 3 axes, but it only ever moves in Z while it's not moving in X and Y. And I picked a pretty simple project for us. We're going to base our drawing on the NEMA 23 stepper motor standard. So let's say we were going to use a CNC machine to make a bracket that could hold up one of these motors. If we go and open one of the exercise files, and that can be found here under Documents, Exercise Files, Chapter 2, and 2-axis Start. Here I provided a drawing of what such a plate might look like. So if you've never encountered the NEMA 23 standard before, it has more or less these dimensions. Some of the dimensions have tolerances associated, but I've left those off for simplicity. Also, to set up our file, I'll head to View and make sure that I'm showing the grid and snapping to the grid just in case. Okay, so if we want to recreate this drawing, the first thing I'll do is to move it off to the side. So let's select the original drawing, head to Transform, and then if I select Translate and Move, I can now pick an amount of change that I want to see in X. So I'm just taking a guess here. Let's call this 75 millimeters, and I will hit the check mark. So now I can build things here around the origin, which will just make my job a little simpler. Now back to the wireframe tab. First off, let's make that large central hole in the middle. So I select Circle. Whenever we go to initiate a piece of geometry, we'll see a couple questions come up here in a window to the left. So for example, I can pick my center point, which in this case is the origin. You'll also note that I'm working in millimeters, so don't forget if your shapes are showing up at a much different size than mine, you may well be in inch. Okay, so my diameter is stated as 38.1. So I'll come over here, click this field, and type in that measurement. That gets the first line. And I'm not done until I tell it to go ahead and accept the changes I've made to the geometry. So I'll need to click this check mark right here. Okay, next up, I'm going to make the outside of this square with rounded corners. So to do that, instead of just selecting a simple rectangle from the wireframe tab, I want to pick rectangular shapes. And now there's a couple options I'll want to set up. So first of all, we are just going with the square shape. Even though this looks like a rounded rectangle, right here, it's actually an ob-brown shape, which is not quite what we want. I'll want to anchor to the center of my rectangle, and then I'll type in the measurements for the height and the width. So it looks like it's square and 56.4 in either dimension. As for the radii on the edges of the rectangle, that's not part of the specific spec. I usually go somewhere in the order of 5 or 4 millimeters. I think I determined that 4 looked the best. And if I click in another field, I can get a preview there. Now, I can also just visually select the center with my mouse. And as long as that's looking good, I can hit enter. I could change the radius here, anything else if I needed to. Okay, so we'll hit check. And then the last thing to do is to add in these bolt holes. So I can see from the drawing that the bolt holes are 47.14 millimeters apart, and that each has a radius of 5 millimeters. So to put that in place, I'm actually going to use a rectangle as a bit of a cheat sheet. And the size of this rectangle will be 47.14 square. I'll also pick anchor to center, and then that lets me place this rectangle right here starting from the origin. And now we'll use those corners as a way to place our remaining bolt holes. So I'll hit check to accept the rectangle shape, make circles on center points with a diameter of 5 millimeters. And now those can be placed on each corner, although I'll have to do the diameter each time. Looks like that one didn't take. Sometimes I find once I've typed in the value, I need to hit tab to make sure that it's recorded by the computer. And then finally I hit check, and those are done. Now we no longer need the rectangle anymore, so I can start selecting those edges and then hit delete or right click and delete entities. And there we have our drawing. So that's it. With 2-axis toolpathing, all we need is a set of 2D geometry to get started.